What is the difference between null equals true and blank equals true in Django? When we add a model field in Django, we generally write. The same is done with foreign key, decimal field, etc. What is the basic difference between null equals true only, blank equals true only, null equals true and blank equals true? In respect to different char field, foreign key, many termini field, date time field, fields? What are the advantages/disadvantages of using option 1, 2, or 3?
Null equals true sets null versus not null on the column in your DB. Blank values for Django field types such as datetime field or foreign key will be stored as null in the DB. Blank determines whether the field will be required in forms. This includes the admin and your custom forms. If blank equals true, then the field will not be required, whereas if it's false, the field cannot be blank. The combo of the two is so frequent because typically if you're going to allow a field to be blank in your form, you're going to also need your database to allow null values for that field. The exception is char fields and text fields, which in Django are never saved as null. Blank values are stored in the DB as an empty string. A few examples. Obviously, those two options don't make logical sense to use, though there might be a use case for null equals true, blank equals false if you want a field to always be required in forms, optional when dealing with an object through something like the shell. Char and text types are never saved as null by Django, so null equals true is unnecessary. However, you can manually set one of these fields to none to force set it as null. If you have a scenario where that might be necessary, you should still include null equals true.
This is how the ON maps blank and null fields for Django 1.8. The database fields created for PostgreSQL 9.4 are The database fields created for MySQL 5.6 are It's crucial to understand that the options in a Django model field definition serve, at least, two purposes: defining the database tables, and defining the default format and validation of model forms. I say default because the values can always be overridden by providing a custom form. Some options affect the database, some options affect forms, and some affect both. When it comes to null and blank, other answers have already made clear that the former affects the database table definition, and the latter affects model validation. I think the distinction can be made even clearer by looking at use cases for all four possible configurations. Null equals false, blank equals false. This is the default configuration and means that the value is required in all circumstances. Null equals true, blank equals true. This means that the field is optional in all circumstances. As noted below, though, this is not the recommended way to make string-based fields optional. Null equals false, blank equals true. This means that the form doesn't require a value but the database does. There are a number of use cases for this. The most common use is for optional string-based fields. As noted in the documentation, the Django idiom is to use the empty string to indicate a missing value. If null was also allowed, you would end up with two different ways to indicate a missing value. If the field is also unique, though, you'll have to use null equals true to prevent multiple empty strings from failing the uniqueness check. Another common situation is that you want to calculate one field automatically based on the value of another. In your save method, say. You don't want the user to provide the value in a form, hence blank equals true, but you do want the database to enforce that a value is always provided, null equals false. Another use is when you want to indicate that a many-to-many field is optional. Because this field is implemented as a separate table rather than a database column, null is meaningless. The value of blank will still affect forms, though, controlling whether or not validation will succeed when there are no relations. Null equals true, blank equals false. This means that the form requires a value but the database doesn't. This may be the most infrequently used configuration, but there are some use cases for it. It's perfectly reasonable to require your users to always include a value even if it's not actually required by your business logic. After all, forms are only one way of adding and editing data. You may have code that is generating data that doesn't need the same stringent validation you want to require of a human editor. Another use case that I've seen is when you have a foreign key for which you don't wish to allow cascade deletion. That is, in normal use the relation should always be there, blank equals false, but if the thing it points to happens to be deleted, you don't want this object to be deleted too. In that case you can use null equals true and on _delete equals models.set _null to implement a simple kind of soft deletion.
You may have your answer, however till this day it's difficult to judge whether to put null equals true or blank equals true or both to a field. I personally think it's pretty useless and confusing to provide so many options to developers. Let them handle the nulls or blanks however they want. I follow this table, from 2 scoops of Django.
If you want to see more, please consider subscribing.